The hospital was silent when Sarah rushed through the automatic doors. Her footsteps echoed through the white hallway as tears streamed down her face. She clutched a yellowed envelope in her trembling hands. The same envelope that Michael Henderson had stomped on in front of everyone at the mall 3 days ago. Now that arrogant and cruel man was there, leaning over the hospital bed, holding the hand of his 8-year-old son who had been in a coma for a week. Sarah stopped at the room's doorway. Her heart was beating frantically. She knew she had the only answer that could save little Jake's life, the innocent boy she had cared for 2 years. But how could she speak to the man who had publicly destroyed her? How could she approach the person who had shouted for the entire mall to hear that she was just an insignificant nanny, that people like her should know their place in society? The doctor beside the bed shook his head negatively. The machines emitted continuous, hypnotizing sounds. Michael Henderson, the powerful businessman who owned the largest construction company in Chicago, cried silently. His tears fell onto the white sheet where his only son lay unconscious. Sarah took a deep breath. It didn't matter what he had done to her. A life was at stake. Jake's life. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Williams woke up every day at 5 in the morning in her small apartment in the south side of Chicago. She lived with her mother, Betty, a 65-year-old woman who had lost her sight due to diabetes. Sarah had worked as a nanny for 5 years to pay for her mother's treatment and slowly complete her medical degree. Every penny was counted. Every sacrifice was worth it when she thought about her dream of becoming a doctor and helping people like her mother. That Tuesday morning, Sarah dressed with special care. She had bought a new blouse with money she had saved for 3 months. It was Jake's birthday, the 8-year-old boy she cared for. Jake was the son of Michael Henderson, but Sarah rarely saw the father. Michael was always absent, always busy with business, always leaving his son in the care of her and the housekeeper. Sarah arrived at the Henderson mansion at 7 in the morning. The house was imposing, with perfectly manicured gardens and a pool that sparkled under the morning sun. Jake ran to meet her as soon as she entered. Jake was a special child. Unlike his father, he was kind, curious, and affectionate. He loved it when Sarah told stories about medicine, about how the human body worked. Sarah had noticed that Jake had an extraordinary memory. He could remember medical details she mentioned casually, asked intelligent questions about anatomy, and always showed genuine interest in learning. That day, Sarah had planned a special surprise for Jake. She had brought a book about the human body adapted for children. It was an expensive gift by her standards, but Jake deserved it. During breakfast, they flipped through the book together. Jake was fascinated by the illustrations of the heart, brain, and lungs. "Sarah, what do you think would happen if the heart stopped beating?" asked Jake with his curious eyes. Sarah patiently explained about cardiac arrests, about how doctors use defibrillators, about the importance of first aid. She had no idea this conversation would be crucial a few days later. The afternoon passed normally. Sarah helped Jake with his homework. They played in the garden, watched cartoons. Jake was delightful company. He was the light in Sarah's difficult life. Taking care of him didn't feel like work. It was almost like caring for the younger brother she never had. At 6 in the evening, Michael Henderson came home. He was a tall man with an imposing appearance, always dressed in expensive suits. His eyes were cold and calculating. He greeted Sarah with a dismissive nod and picked up Jake. "Daddy, look what Sarah gave me," said Jake, showing the anatomy book. Michael quickly flipped through the book and returned it to Jake without showing interest. He didn't even look at Sarah or thank her for the gift. To him, Sarah was just another employee. Someone invisible, replaceable, unimportant in his privileged life. Now is a good time to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss any details of this emotional story that's just beginning. On Friday of that week, Michael decided to take Jake to the mall. It was something rare. Usually, he left these activities to Sarah or the housekeeper. But that day, perhaps moved by an impulse of paternal guilt, he decided to spend the afternoon with his son. Sarah accompanied them, as she always did when they went out. At the mall, Jake was enchanted by an educational toy store. He wanted a miniature human body model that cost $200. For Michael, $200 was the money he spent on lunch. But he looked at the toy and shook his head negatively. "Jake, you already have too many toys at home. You don't need another one." Jake was disappointed but didn't insist. Sarah saw the sadness in the boy's eyes and her heart tightened. She knew Jake really liked that type of educational toy. It was different from the expensive but empty toys Michael usually bought to compensate for his absence. Sarah discreetly approached Jake and whispered, "Don't worry, Jake. Maybe on your next birthday." They continued walking through the mall. Michael was on the phone, as always, solving work problems. Jake held Sarah's hand and chatted animatedly about what he had learned at school. Sarah listened attentively, asking questions and showing genuine interest. That's when it happened. Jake was telling about a science class when he tripped on an uneven floor. He fell strangely, hitting his head on the corner of a marble bench. The sound was dry and frightening. Jake lost consciousness immediately. Sarah reacted instantly. Her years studying medicine, even though still incomplete, had prepared her for emergencies. She knelt beside Jake, checked his vital signs, positioned his head properly to prevent asphyxiation. She screamed for someone to call an ambulance while keeping Jake stable. Michael dropped his phone and ran to them. His face was pale with despair. He knelt beside his son and tried to pick him up, but Sarah firmly stopped him. "Mr. Henderson, please, don't move him now. He might have a spinal injury. We need to wait for the paramedics to arrive." Michael pushed her forcefully. "You're just a nanny. Don't tell me what to do with my son." A crowd had formed around them. People were filming with cell phones, whispering among themselves, some trying to help. Sarah ignored Michael's aggressiveness and continued monitoring Jake. She checked his breathing, kept his airways clear, observed any sign of change in his condition. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes. The paramedics immediately recognized that Sarah had done everything correctly. They praised her for her quick and precise action. Jake was placed on a stretcher and taken to the nearest hospital. Sarah tried to get into the ambulance, but Michael blocked her again. "You're not family. You have no right to accompany him." At the hospital, Jake underwent various tests. CT scan, MRI, neurological tests. The doctors discovered he had suffered severe head trauma. There was a subdural hematoma pressing on his brain. Jake needed surgery immediately. During the long hours of waiting, Sarah remained at the hospital. She hadn't been invited, but she couldn't leave knowing Jake was in danger. She sat in the waiting room, praying silently, thinking about the gentle boy who had become so important in her life. The surgery lasted 6 hours. When the neurosurgeon came out of the operating room, his face was serious. The surgery had been technically successful. The hematoma was removed, intracranial pressure was controlled. But Jake had fallen into a coma. The doctors didn't know when or if he would wake up. Michael was devastated. For the first time in his life, his money and power couldn't solve a problem. He hired the best specialists, transferred Jake to the most modern hospital in the city, assembled a real medical team around his son. But nothing worked. Jake continued sleeping, connected to machines, breathing artificially. Days of agony followed. Michael practically lived at the hospital. He canceled all meetings, abandoned all business. Nothing mattered besides Jake. He talked to his unconscious son, told him about future projects, asked forgiveness for being an absent father. Sarah also went to the hospital every day. She talked to the nurses, brought flowers, sat beside Jake's bed and told the same stories he loved to hear. She talked about medicine, about how the body healed itself, about the strength of the will to live. Michael tolerated Sarah's presence at the hospital, but barely spoke to her. In his state of despair, he had momentarily forgotten the antipathy he felt toward her. All that mattered was Jake. A week passed without changes. Doctors began talking about the possibility of permanent brain damage. Some specialists suggested that maybe it was time to consider turning off the machines. Michael absolutely refused to accept this possibility. It was on one of those difficult afternoons that Sarah decided to act. She had remembered something important. A few months ago, Jake had casually mentioned that he had frequent headaches. Sarah had suggested he tell his father, but Jake said Michael was too busy to worry about silly headaches. Sarah also remembered other symptoms Jake had described over the months: occasional dizziness, moments of confusion, difficulty concentrating on some tasks. At the time, she had thought they were normal childhood things. But now, with her developing medical knowledge, she began to connect the dots. Sarah spent the entire night researching on the internet, consulting her medical books, talking to classmates from college. She was beginning to form a theory about what had really caused Jake's coma. The next day, Sarah looked for Dr. Robert Moore, the neurosurgeon responsible for Jake's case. Dr. Moore was an experienced man, about 50 years old, known for being a competent but also arrogant professional. He didn't usually waste time talking to people who weren't doctors or direct family members of patients. "Dr. Moore, I need to speak with you about Jake," said Sarah, approaching the doctor in the hospital corridor. Dr. Moore looked at her impatiently. "Are you related to the boy?" "I'm his nanny. But I study medicine and would like to share some important observations about symptoms Jake was presenting before the accident." Dr. Moore sighed with irritation. "Miss, I appreciate your concern, but complex neurological cases aren't a matter for medical students. Much less for nannies. If you want to help, pray for the boy to wake up." Sarah insisted. "Doctor, please, listen to me for just 5 minutes. Jake had been presenting symptoms that may indicate a pre-existing condition. This could completely change his treatment." Dr. Moore dismissed her with a hand gesture. "Thank you for your concern, but leave the diagnoses to qualified professionals." Sarah was frustrated but didn't give up. She looked for other doctors on the team, but they all reacted the same way. To them, she was just a nanny without qualification to give opinions on medical matters. Her social and professional condition automatically disqualified her, regardless of the knowledge she might have. Michael observed these attempts by Sarah with growing irritation. To him, it was inadmissible for a simple employee to try to interfere in his son's medical treatment. He saw this as presumption, as lack of knowledge about social hierarchies. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after the accident, Sarah made a desperate decision. She knew she couldn't be heard by doctors through normal channels. So she decided to try something radical. Sarah had discovered that Dr. Moore frequented a specific coffee shop every morning before going to the hospital. She arrived at the coffee shop at 7 in the morning and waited for him to appear. When Dr. Moore entered, Sarah approached him again. "Dr. Moore, I know you don't want to listen to me, but I have information that could save Jake's life. If you give me just 10 minutes, I'll explain everything I observed." Dr. Moore was visibly irritated. "Miss, I already told you not to meddle in matters you don't understand. You're being disruptive. If you insist on this, I'll ask hospital security to prevent your entry." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes but remained firm. "Doctor, Jake has a condition called cerebral arteriovenous malformation. The symptoms he presented in recent months are classic of this condition. The trauma from the fall only triggered a complication that was already developing. If you only treat the hematoma without addressing the malformation, he could have new crises." Dr. Moore stopped and looked at Sarah more attentively. "How do you know about arteriovenous malformations?" Sarah quickly explained her medical training, the specific symptoms Jake had described, the correlations she had identified. For a few minutes, Dr. Moore listened to her with genuine interest. But then he shook his head. "Look, your observations are interesting, but we've already done all the necessary tests. If there were an arteriovenous malformation, it would have appeared on the MRI." Sarah insisted. "Doctor, some malformations are very small and might not appear on conventional exams. It would be necessary to do a specific cerebral angiography." Dr. Moore sighed. "Angiographies are invasive and expensive procedures. We can't do unnecessary tests based on theories from a student." The conversation ended there. Dr. Moore left the coffee shop, leaving Sarah alone with her frustration and despair. That afternoon, Sarah was at the hospital again, sitting beside Jake's bed, when Michael entered the room. He had heard from a nurse about Sarah's conversation with Dr. Moore at the coffee shop. Michael was furious. His face was red with anger when he approached Sarah. "How dare you?" he shouted, making some people in the corridor look toward the room. "How dare you harass my son's doctors with your absurd theories?" Sarah stood up, trying to remain calm. "Mr. Henderson, I just want to help Jake. I observed important symptoms that—" Michael interrupted her aggressively. "You're a nanny. A simple nanny who takes care of children. You have no knowledge, no qualification, no right to give opinions about my son's health. Mr. Henderson, I've been studying medicine for 4 years. I know what I'm talking about. 4 years of community college doesn't make you a doctor," shouted Michael, his voice echoing through the corridor. "You're an employee. A servant. People like you should know their place." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Michael's words weren't just cruel, they were deeply humiliating. She looked around and saw that several people were watching the scene. Nurses, other parents of patients, visitors. Everyone looked at her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "You're fired," continued Michael. "I don't want to see you near my son anymore. I don't want to see you in this hospital. You're an intruder, a person who doesn't know social boundaries." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face but maintained her dignity. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your pain, but you understand nothing." Michael cut her off again. "You don't understand what it's like to be a father. You don't understand what it's like to have real responsibilities. You live in a small world, taking care of children, and think you can give opinions about real medicine." Michael's words were like stabs. Sarah felt he was attacking not just her, but her entire life story, all her efforts to succeed in life despite financial difficulties. Michael continued, "You want to know the truth? People like you are replaceable. Tomorrow I'll hire another nanny, and no one will miss you. You're invisible to people who really matter in this world." Sarah couldn't speak anymore. The humiliation was complete. She looked at Jake, still unconscious in the bed, and whispered a silent goodbye. Then she left the room with all the dignity she could muster. But the humiliation wasn't over. Michael followed her to the elevator, still shouting, "And don't think about coming back. Don't think about approaching my family again. I'll talk to security so you'll be banned from this hospital." The elevator was full of people. Doctors, nurses, visitors. Everyone looked at Sarah with a mixture of pity and discomfort. Michael continued speaking loudly, ensuring everyone heard his humiliating words. "This is the difference between us," said Michael, pointing at Sarah. "I built an empire. I create jobs. I have real responsibilities. And you? You're just a poor nanny who can't even finish college." Sarah left the hospital completely devastated. She had lost not only her job but also the opportunity to help Jake. She knew her theory about the arteriovenous malformation was correct, but there was nothing more she could do. During the weekend, Sarah stayed home, taking care of her mother and trying to recover from the humiliation. Betty noticed something was wrong and tried to comfort her daughter. "Sarah, honey, sometimes life tests our strength in cruel ways. But people like you, who have a good heart and true knowledge, always find a way to make a difference." Sarah cried in her mother's lap, "Mom, I could have saved Jake. I knew what was wrong with him. But no one wanted to listen to me because I'm just a poor nanny." Betty stroked her daughter's hair. "Sarah, the truth always finds a way. If you really know how to help that boy, God will give you an opportunity. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit the like button. This helps us a lot and shows you want to see more content like this." On Monday, Sarah woke up with renewed determination. She couldn't give up on Jake. Even though Michael had publicly humiliated her, even though the doctors refused to listen to her, she needed to find a way to help. Sarah returned to the hospital, but this time with a different strategy. She knew she couldn't enter Jake's room or speak directly with the medical team. So she decided to approach other people. Sarah began talking to the nurses. She discovered that several of them had also noticed inconsistencies in Jake's case. The standard tests didn't completely explain why the coma persisted for so long. There was something more complex happening. One of the nurses, named Jennifer, was especially kind and experienced. She had worked for 15 years in neurology and had seen similar cases. "Sarah, I confess I also found some things strange about Jake's case," said Jennifer during a coffee break. "His neurological pattern isn't typical of a simple hematoma." Sarah explained her theories to Jennifer, who was impressed by the young nanny's technical knowledge. Jennifer promised to try to talk to Dr. Moore about the possibility of doing additional tests. But Dr. Moore remained resistant. He had felt personally offended by Sarah's attempts to interfere with his work. To him, accepting her suggestions would be an admission of professional incompetence. Meanwhile, Jake's condition remained stable but without improvement. Michael was entering despair. He had consulted specialists from other states, looked for experimental treatments, spent a fortune on tests and consultations. Nothing worked. It was on Tuesday, 10 days after the accident, that Sarah decided to take the most courageous action of her life. Sarah had discovered that Dr. Alexander Carter, a renowned neurologist from Boston, was visiting the hospital for a medical conference. Dr. Carter was known for being more open to innovative ideas and for valuing observations from different sources. Sarah waited for Dr. Carter in the hospital parking lot. When he arrived, she respectfully approached him and asked for a few minutes of his attention. Unlike Dr. Moore, Dr. Carter agreed to listen to what Sarah had to say. Sarah presented her theory in an organized and scientific manner. She showed detailed notes about the symptoms Jake had presented in the months before the accident. She explained neurological correlations, cited recent medical studies, demonstrated deep knowledge about arteriovenous malformations. Dr. Carter was impressed. This is a very sophisticated analysis. Do you have medical training? Sarah explained her situation. She was in her 4th year of medical school, worked as a nanny to support herself, had cared for Jake for 2 years and observed important symptoms that were ignored. Dr. Carter decided to investigate the case personally. He gained access to Jake's tests and immediately realized Sarah was right. There were subtle signs of an arteriovenous malformation that had gone unnoticed in conventional exams. Dr. Carter looked for Michael to propose a specific cerebral angiography. Michael, desperate for any hope, immediately authorized the test. The angiography revealed exactly what Sarah had suspected, a small but dangerous arteriovenous malformation that was causing cerebral microhemorrhages. This condition explained both Jake's previous symptoms and the persistence of the coma. Dr. Carter explained to Michael, "Mr. Henderson, without this discovery, your son would probably never wake up completely. The arteriovenous malformation was causing progressive brain damage. We need to intervene surgically as soon as possible." Michael was shocked. "How didn't you discover this before?" Dr. Carter was honest. "The discovery was made thanks to observations from someone who knew your son very well and was able to identify symptoms that went unnoticed by us. This person has impressive medical knowledge and exceptional observation skills." "Who was this person?" asked Michael. Dr. Carter looked directly into Michael's eyes. "It was Sarah Williams, your son's nanny. She identified the symptoms, formulated the diagnostic hypothesis, and insisted we do more specific tests. Without her, we would probably lose your son." Michael felt like the ground had collapsed under his feet. Sarah. The woman he had publicly humiliated. The person he had called insignificant, replaceable, incompetent. She had been the only person capable of saving Jake. The surgery to correct the arteriovenous malformation was performed the next day. It was a delicate and complex procedure, but Dr. Carter was one of the best neurosurgeons in the country. The operation lasted 8 hours. During the surgery, Michael remained in the waiting room, tormented by guilt. He remembered every cruel word he had directed at Sarah. He remembered her face, the tears she tried to hide, the dignity with which she had endured the humiliation. Michael began to question his entire worldview. How had he become such an arrogant person? How had he reached the point of judging people's worth by their social position or the money they possessed? He remembered his own childhood. Michael had grown up in a lower middle-class family. His father was a mechanic, his mother was a seamstress. They worked hard to support the family and give their children an education. Michael had achieved everything through much effort and determination. But at some point, success had changed his personality. He had started believing he was superior to other people. He had begun treating employees as inferior beings. He had become exactly the type of person he used to hate when he was young. The surgery was successful. Dr. Carter came out of the operating room with a smile on his face. The arteriovenous malformation had been completely corrected. Now it was a matter of time for Jake to wake up from the coma. "Mr. Henderson, your son is going to be fine," said Dr. Carter. The surgery was perfect. In a few days, he should start regaining consciousness. Michael cried with relief. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you for saving my son." Dr. Carter placed his hand on Michael's shoulder. "Mr. Henderson, I want you to understand something. I didn't save your son alone. The person who really saved Jake was Sarah Williams. Without her observations, without her insistence, without her knowledge, we wouldn't have discovered the problem in time." "I need to talk to her," said Michael. "I need to apologize." Dr. Carter shook his head. "Mr. Henderson, Sarah tried for an entire week to talk to our medical team. She was ignored, disrespected, and humiliated. Not just by you, but by all of us who thought she wasn't qualified to give opinions." Michael felt deep pain in his chest. "How can I fix this?" Dr. Carter replied, "Mr. Henderson, Sometimes the mistakes we make are so big they can't simply be fixed. They can only be learned from. In the following days, Jake began showing signs of improvement. His reflexes gradually returned, he began responding to stimuli, his brain functions normalized. Within a week, he was completely awake and conscious. Jake didn't remember the accident, but he clearly remembered Sarah. The first thing he asked when he woke up was, "Where is Sarah?" Michael didn't know how to respond. How could he explain to an 8-year-old boy that he had treated Sarah cruelly and unfairly? Jake insisted, "Daddy, I want to see Sarah. She promised to teach me about the heart. I want to know if my heart is working well after surgery." Michael realized Jake had no idea what had happened. To the boy, Sarah was simply the caring nanny who took care of him with love and attention. Dr. Carter visited Jake the next day and was impressed by his recovery. "Jake, do you remember having headaches before the accident?" Jake nodded, "Yes, doctor. I told Sarah, and she said I should tell my dad. But Daddy was always very busy." Dr. Carter looked at Michael. "See? Sarah hadn't only identified the symptoms after the accident. She had already observed them before and tried to alert about the need for medical investigation." Michael felt even more guilty. Sarah had tried to protect Jake long before the accident happened. If he had paid attention to her observations, maybe the accident wouldn't have had such serious consequences. That night, Michael made the most difficult decision of his life. He needed to find Sarah and ask for forgiveness. Not just ask for forgiveness, but publicly acknowledge the mistake he had made. Michael got Sarah's address through his company's human resources department. He drove to the outskirts of Chicago, to the small apartment where Sarah lived with her mother. It was a region Michael had never visited. The streets were simple, the houses were modest, but there was something dignified and honest about that place. Michael realized he had spent his entire life avoiding knowing how the people who worked for him lived. Michael knocked on Sarah's apartment door at 8 in the evening. Betty answered, unable to see who was on the other side. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Michael Henderson, Jake's father. I would like to speak with Sarah, if possible." Betty became tense. She had consoled Sarah for days after the humiliation at the hospital. She knew every tear her daughter had shed because of that arrogant man. "Sarah," called Betty. "It's Jake's father." Sarah appeared in the living room and was shocked to see Michael there. She didn't expect to see him again, much less at her home. "Mr. Henderson? What are you doing here? Is Jake okay?" Michael looked at Sarah and noticed how tired and dejected she seemed. He also noticed how she immediately worried about Jake, even after everything that had happened. "Sarah, Jake is fine. He woke up from the coma. He's completely recovered." Sarah sighed with relief and her eyes filled with tears. "Thank God. I was so worried." Michael interrupted, "Sarah, Jake is fine thanks to you. You saved my son's life." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean?" Michael explained the entire situation. How Dr. Carter had investigated her theories, how they had discovered the arteriovenous malformation, how the surgery had been successful. Sarah listened to everything in silence, with tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," continued Michael, "I came here to ask for your forgiveness. I treated you cruelly and unfairly. I humiliated you publicly when you were just trying to save my son. I'm the person who should be apologizing, not you." Sarah was too emotional to speak. Betty, who had listened to the entire conversation, approached and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Michael continued, "Sarah, I spent my whole life believing that people's worth was measured by the money they have or the social position they occupy. I was completely wrong. People's worth is measured by character, by kindness, by true knowledge. And you have all of that." Sarah finally managed to speak. "Mr. Henderson, I didn't do that expecting recognition. I did it because I loved Jake like he was my brother." Michael nodded. "I know. And that makes your actions even more admirable. You cared for my son with genuine love, while I, who am his father, was always too busy to pay attention to him." "Mr. Henderson," said Sarah, "I accept your apologies. But what's most important is that Jake is okay." Michael shook his head. "Sarah, apologies aren't enough. I need to do more than that. I want to correct the injustice I committed against you." Michael explained that he had talked to Dr. Carter about Sarah's academic future. Dr. Carter had been so impressed with her knowledge that he offered a paid internship opportunity at his clinic in Boston. "Besides that," said Michael, I want to pay for your medical school. Completely. And I want to pay for your mother's treatment at a private clinic. People like you deserve all possible opportunities. Sarah was shocked. Mr. Henderson, that's very generous, but I can't accept. Sarah, interrupted Michael, I'm not doing this out of generosity. I'm doing this out of justice. As recognition of your true worth. Betty, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Sarah, accept it. This man is trying to correct his mistakes. And you deserve all these opportunities. Sarah looked at her mother, then at Michael, and finally nodded. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I accept, but with one condition. What condition? I want to continue visiting Jake. He's very special to me. Michael smiled for the first time in weeks. Sarah, I was hoping you would say that. Jake asks about you every day. He misses you. Michael got up to leave, but stopped at the door. Sarah, there's one more thing. I want to apologize publicly. The same way I humiliated you in front of other people, I want to publicly acknowledge that you saved my son. Sarah shook her head. Mr. Henderson, that's not necessary. Yes, it is, said Michael firmly. It's the right thing to do. The next day, Michael organized a press conference at the hospital. He invited doctors, nurses, staff, and even people who had witnessed Sarah's humiliation at the mall and hospital. Michael began by talking about Jake's accident, about the coma, about the successful surgery. Then he said, I'm here today to acknowledge that my son is alive thanks to a person I treated terribly. Sarah Williams, Jake's nanny, was the only person who correctly identified the medical condition that was putting his life at risk. Michael continued, Sarah repeatedly tried to alert doctors about her observations. She was ignored, disrespected, and humiliated. By me, especially. I treated her as if she were inferior, as if her opinions had no value, as if she were replaceable and insignificant. The audience was in absolute silence. Many people present had witnessed Sarah's humiliation and now understood the dimension of the mistake that had been made. I was completely wrong, said Michael, his voice choked with emotion. A person's worth isn't determined by their social position or their money. It's determined by their character, their kindness, their true competence. And Sarah has all of that. Michael looked directly at Sarah, who was in the front row. Sarah, you're not just a nanny. You're a brilliant future doctor, a person of exceptional character, and the woman who saved my son's life. I publicly ask for your forgiveness and promise I'll never again judge a person by the social position they occupy. The audience was moved. Many people were crying, including some nurses who had witnessed the events. Dr. Carter stood up and said, Ladies and gentlemen, this case teaches us an important lesson about medical humility and about the value of observations from people who live intimately with patients. Sarah Williams demonstrated medical knowledge and observation skills that impressed our entire team. Dr. Moore, who was present at the conference, also stood up. I want to publicly apologize to Sarah. I should have listened to her observations carefully, regardless of her formal training. She was right, and we were wrong. Now it's time for you to leave your comment. Tell us, have you ever been in a situation where you were judged by your social position or profession? How did you overcome that situation? We want to know your story. Sarah stood up and went to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Mr. Henderson for his apology and for his generosity. But I want to say something important. I didn't do what I did expecting recognition or reward. I did it because Jake is a special child I love like family. Sarah continued, all of us, regardless of our profession or social class, have valuable knowledge and experiences. What happened to me can happen to anyone who is judged by appearances. The important thing is to never give up doing what's right, even when we're not initially heard. The conference ended with emotional applause. Several people approached Sarah to congratulate her and apologize for witnessing her humiliation without intervening. In the following days, Sarah's story spread throughout Chicago. Local newspapers published articles about the nanny who saved her employer's life with her medical knowledge. The story became a symbol of how social prejudice can prevent genuine talents from being recognized. Jake was discharged from the hospital a week later. The first person he wanted to see was Sarah. The reunion was emotional. Sarah, shouted Jake when he saw her enter the room. I missed you so much. Daddy told me you helped the doctors cure me. Sarah hugged Jake affectionately. Jake, I promised I would always take care of you. And I'll always keep that promise. Jake looked at Sarah with his curious eyes. Sarah, Daddy said you're going to be a real doctor. Does that mean you'll be able to take care of other children like you take care of me? Sarah smiled. Yes, Jake. I'm going to become a pediatrician to take care of many special children like you. Can I help you? Asked Jake. I know many things about the human body that you taught me. Sarah laughed. Of course you can. You'll be my special assistant. Jake turned to his father. Daddy, can Sarah continue taking care of me even after she becomes a doctor? Michael looked at Sarah and smiled. Jake, Sarah will always be part of our family. No matter what profession she has. Sarah began working at Dr. Carter's clinic in Boston 2 weeks later. It was an incredible opportunity to learn from one of the best neurologists in the country. Dr. Carter introduced her to the entire team as the young doctor who had saved Jake's life through exceptional clinical observation. At the same time, Sarah continued her medical studies with renewed enthusiasm. Now she no longer needed to work as a nanny to support herself. Michael had kept his promise to fully pay for her education and Betty's treatment. Betty began advanced treatment for her diabetes and quickly recovered part of her vision. For the first time in years, she could see her daughter's face clearly. Sarah, said Betty on a Sunday afternoon, I always knew you were special. But now the whole world knows. Sarah hugged her mother. Mom, everything I achieved was thanks to the values you taught me. You taught me that a person's character is worth more than any wealth. 3 months later, Sarah was invited to give a lecture at a medical conference about the importance of clinical observation and valuing information from non-medical caregivers. Her presentation was widely applauded. Michael also completely changed the way he managed his companies. He implemented employee appreciation programs, created professional growth opportunities for people from less favored social classes, and began treating all his collaborators with respect and dignity. Jake continued showing exceptional interest in medicine. He began accompanying Sarah on some visits to the clinic and became a kind of mascot for the medical team. Everyone was impressed by his intelligence and curiosity. 1 year after the accident, Jake organized a small party to celebrate his complete recovery. He insisted that Sarah be the guest of honor. Sarah, said Jake during the party, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor like you. I want to help other children who are sick. Sarah smiled. Jake, I'm sure you'll be an amazing doctor. You have the generous heart and curious mind that every good doctor needs to have. Michael watched the interaction between Sarah and Jake with emotion. He had almost lost his son because of his arrogance and prejudice. Now, thanks to the humility he learned from Sarah, he had not only gotten his son back but also gained a true friend and a life lesson he would never forget. Dr. Carter, who was also present at the party, approached Sarah. Sarah, I have a proposal for you. When you graduate, I'd like you to come work with me as a pediatric neurologist. You have a natural talent for this area. Sarah was moved. Doctor, it would be an honor to work with you. Dr. Carter smiled. Sarah, actually it would be an honor for me to work with you. You taught me that true medicine isn't learned only from books, but also through careful observation and genuine love for patients. The party continued until late. It was a celebration not only of Jake's recovery, but of the transformation of all the people involved in the story. Sarah graduated from medical school 2 years later, with honors and special recognition for her research on arteriovenous malformations in children. Her thesis was based on Jake's case and helped establish new protocols for early identification of this condition. On graduation day, Jake was in the front row, applauding enthusiastically when Sarah went up on stage to receive her diploma. Michael was beside his son, also applauding, with tears of pride in his eyes. Betty, who could now see perfectly thanks to the treatment Michael had funded, cried with emotion watching her daughter achieve her dream. After the ceremony, Sarah approached Michael. Mr. Henderson, thank you for everything. For giving me the opportunity to become a doctor, for taking care of my mother, for teaching me that people can change. Michael shook his head. Sarah, thank you for teaching me that a person's true worth has nothing to do with money or social position. You saved me from becoming a person I wouldn't like to be. Jake ran to Sarah and hugged her. Dr. Sarah. Now you're a real doctor. Sarah laughed. Jake, now I'm a real doctor, but you're still my favorite special patient. Sarah began working at Dr. Carter's clinic as a pediatric neurologist. She quickly gained a reputation as an exceptional doctor, known not only for her technical competence but also for her ability to listen to and value information from family members and caregivers. Michael regularly visited the clinic with Jake for follow-up consultations. Jake was completely healthy, but the visits had become a family tradition. It was a way for Michael to constantly remember the lesson he had learned about humility and respect. During one of these visits, Jake said to Sarah, "Sarah, do you remember when I was little and was in the hospital?" Sarah smiled. "Of course I remember, Jake. Daddy told me you saved my life when everyone thought you didn't know anything about medicine." Sarah looked at Michael. "Your daddy learned a very important lesson during that time." Jake nodded. "He told me he learned that all people are important, no matter what job they do." Michael approached. "Jake, Sarah taught me that knowledge and kindness can come from anyone. The important thing is to always be willing to listen and learn." 5 years after the accident, Sarah was already one of the most respected pediatric neurologists in the region. She had helped hundreds of children and their families. But she never forgot where she came from or the lessons she had learned. Sarah created a program at her clinic to train non-medical caregivers to identify neurological symptoms in children. The program was named Project Jake in honor of the boy who had changed so many lives. Michael became one of the program's biggest financial supporters. He saw this as a way to honor the lessons Sarah had taught him about valuing knowledge and observation from all people. Jake, now 13 years old, continued showing interest in medicine. He regularly participated in Project Jake activities, helping Sarah teach other caregivers about neurological warning signs. One day, during one of the project's lectures, a mother approached Sarah. "Doctor, thank you for teaching us to observe our children more carefully. I identified the symptoms you described to my daughter, and doctors discovered a problem that could have been very serious if not treated in time." Sarah smiled. "This is exactly why we do this work. You, who live daily with the children, are the best observers of the signs they present." The woman continued, "Doctor, when I was younger, I worked as a nanny. Many times I tried to talk to parents about things I noticed in the children, but they wouldn't listen to me because I was just an employee." Sarah nodded. "Unfortunately, that still happens a lot. But stories like yours show we're changing this reality. Your knowledge is valuable and should be respected." Michael, who was present at the lecture, stood up. "I'd like to share my experience. A few years ago, I made the terrible mistake of devaluing a person's knowledge because of their profession. I almost lost my son because of my prejudice. Sarah taught me that we should listen to all people with respect and attention." The audience was moved by Michael's testimony. Many people identified with the story, either as caregivers who had been devalued or as employers who had made similar mistakes. After the lecture, Jake approached Sarah. "Sarah, do you think when I'm a doctor, I'll be able to help people like you do?" Sarah hugged Jake. "Jake, you already help people. Your story inspired many families to value their children's caregivers. When you become a doctor, I'm sure you'll be incredible." Jake smiled. "Sarah, thank you for taking care of me when I was little. And thank you for teaching my daddy to be a better person." Sarah looked at Michael, who was listening to the conversation. "Jake, your daddy was always a good person. Sometimes good people make mistakes, but what matters is learning from those mistakes and becoming better." 10 years after the original accident, Sarah was invited to give a lecture at an international pediatric neurology congress. Her presentation on the importance of non-medical observation in early diagnosis of arteriovenous malformations was considered revolutionary. In the audience was Jake, now 18 years old and about to enter medical school. He had been accepted to the best universities in the country, but chose to study at the same institution where Sarah had graduated. After the presentation, Jake went up on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say a few words. I'm Jake Henderson, the patient who saved my life when I was 8 years old. Sarah isn't just an exceptional doctor. She's an example of how determination, knowledge, and kindness can overcome any prejudice." Jake continued, "When I was 8 years old, I almost died because the adults around me thought a nanny couldn't have valuable medical knowledge. Sarah taught me that all people have something important to contribute, regardless of their profession or social class." The audience stood up to applaud. Many of the doctors present were moved, recognizing their own limitations in valuing observations from non-medical caregivers. Michael, who was also present, approached the microphone. "As Jake's father and as a businessman, I want to say that the most important lesson of my life was learning to respect and value all people. Sarah taught me that true success isn't measured by the money we earn, but by the good we do for others." Sarah concluded, "Ladies and gentlemen, medicine is a human science. And the best observations about human beings come from people who live with them daily, who love them, who genuinely care about their well-being. Our job as doctors is to value these observations and work in partnership with all caregivers. Now we want to hear from you. Leave your comment telling us if you've ever been in a situation similar to Sarah's. Have you ever been devalued because of your profession? Have you ever witnessed someone being judged by appearances? How did this story inspire you? Share your experience with us and help other people reflect on the importance of respect and valuation of all human beings. And if this story touched your heart, share it with your friends and family. Stories like this remind us that we all have value, we all have something important to contribute, and that we should never judge a person by the profession they have or the social condition they find themselves in. What really matters is the character, true knowledge, and kindness we carry within us.